1918, Theodore Roosevelt addressed a crowd near his Long Island home and impressed the Heckler family of Roslyn, New York.
Instead of sitting up on the stage or walking out from behind the curtain, he started at the back of the audience and walked down the aisle, shaking hands with people, grinning in such a way it looked like his teeth were moving from side to side. But it was such a dramatic difference from most politicians in the manner in which he showed how excited he was about getting out among the people.
Ken's parents, Charles and Catherine Heckler, were staunch Republicans and ardent practitioners of what Theodore Roosevelt described as the strenuous life.
Theodore Roosevelt denounced what he called the doctrine of ignoble ease. He always used to say, as a person gets older, it's much better to wear out than to rust out, to be active, to participate, to work hard, and not to vegetate.
Charles Heckler, after teaching animal husbandry at the University of Missouri, became superintendent of Harbor Hill, a 600-acre estate owned by Long Island millionaire Clarence Mackey.
There were about 150 employees on the estate. They were self-sufficient. They had their own dairy, they had their own chicken farm, their own gardens and everything that they supplied the main house with.
As the estate attracted immigrants to work and local children to play, Harbor Hill reflected America's growing diversity and disparity. Esther Bowman, while visiting in her Aunt Catherine's colonial farmhouse, marveled at the Hechlers' lifestyle.
We always sat in the dining room, and there was a buzzer under the table that my aunt would press when she wanted the cook to come in.
Amid the luxurious trappings and perks of Charles's job, he and Catherine committed themselves to serving the less fortunate.
They looked at life and interpreted it honestly, and they wanted to make life better.
Besides overseeing Harbor Hill, Charles Heckler helped organize the Nassau County Farm Bureau. He started the first Boy Scout troop and the local Kiwanis Club. Charles also served on city council and chaired the local National Bank and the Roslyn Board of Education. Catherine Heckler, a former school teacher, painted landscapes and cultivated award-winning chrysanthemums. She also served as vice president of the Nassau County Women's Republican Federation and worked on behalf of the County Home Bureau, the Red Cross, and District Nurses Association.
Both of them are on the board of directors of the Roslyn Neighborhood Association, which was founded about 1915, and that was the major benevolent group here in Roslyn. And they were involved in helping to assimilate new immigrants through typing classes or English classes.
Members of Trinity Episcopal Church in Roslyn, the Hechlers were driven by the Judeo-Christian call to love one's neighbor as oneself.
Every night my mother used to read to me the principles of morality in the Bible. They seem to have a moral compass. They seem to have a sense of ethics.
The merits of duty and sacrifice became evident to young Kenneth in the dead of winter, when Ken chose the warmth of his home over the chill of his magazine route. Charles Heckler admonished his youngest son to fulfill his obligation.
He said, "Your customers will be wanting to read these over Sunday, and why are you neglecting them?" And I said, "Well, look at the snow out there. I can't go out in that snow." And he said, "But think of your customers." I was really angry at my father. But the first customer was so overjoyed, he said, "Come on in. Oh, isn't this wonderful? Here's a cup of hot chocolate." This happened at virtually every house where I stopped that evening. And I began to think as I trudged back, my father's a lot smarter than I thought he was.
Despite such significant gains as the right of women to vote in national elections, progressivism lost momentum among Republicans in the 1920s. The ebb followed the death of progressive champion Theodore Roosevelt in 1919 and the end of the First World War.
Increased wages and improved working conditions, the 8-hour day, all those things that workers have won during the war. In the post-war era, business is going to react against that. And the Republican Party is going to provide the leadership. That progressive wing, which had been interested in reform, at the end of World War I is much more interested in promoting the interests of business.
The gulf between rich and poor increased to the point that production began to exceed demand. Relaxed lending practices, meanwhile, drove overly optimistic speculation in the stock market. The market's subsequent crash in 1929 helped cripple the nation's banking system. The Great Depression, a decade of unprecedented economic hardship, enveloped the nation and much of the industrialized world.
And the slums, particularly, and among laboring people, they were selling apples for a nickel apiece on the streets of New York in order to eke out enough to get food for their families.
As a third of the nation's available labor force became unemployed, Americans were forced to reconsider progressivism and the meaning of justice.
At the dawn of the progressive era, the notion of justice is simply to provide everybody an opportunity. The Depression really changes that notion somewhat. People are interested in opportunity still, but they're also thinking about the role the government can play in security, in providing a sense of fairness and being able to respond to the needs of the poorest.
President Herbert Hoover initially opposed large-scale government relief, expecting the nation's industrial giants to make economic concessions. The federal government, fearing inflation, restricted cash flow while increasing tariffs and taxes. President Hoover's response to America's deepening depression helped shape 15-year-old Ken Hechlers' view of the role of government.
Herbert Hoover kept saying prosperity is just around the corner, and if we only wait, why, prosperity will come. And I began to develop an antipathy to inaction. I said, the President of the United States is the leader of our country. Why doesn't he do something about all this unemployment and suffering that's taking place?
In 1932, the American people elected a Democrat to serve as the nation's chief executive.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Franklin Roosevelt wielded his presidential powers as freely as his cousin Theodore before him.
He set up the Civilian Conservation Corps not only to save our forests, but to employ people that were out of work. He saved the farmers who were getting foreclosed on their mortgages, and he gave inspiration and leadership to the country, which was so dramatically different from the inaction of Herbert Hoover.
Fear is vanishing, and confidence is growing on every side.